So this is a read aloud of reading passage number 1, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, from Buddhism by John Snelling. Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of one of the great world religions, Buddhism, began his life as the son of an Indian prince. What caused this man to leave the comfort of his father's palace to wander in poverty, searching for the meaning of life? Read on to find out more about the Buddha's life and teachings. You need to know. Buddhism is one of the major religions of the world, with hundreds of millions of followers. The founder, Siddhartha Gautama, lived from about 563 to 483 BC. At this time, Brahmin priests had gained a great deal of power, causing some people to rebel and search for other spiritual paths. Among these new religions was Buddhism. It began when Gautama rejected his privileged life as the son of a prince. One day, after years of searching for answers to life's meaning, Gautama sat down to rest and think under a tree. After several hours of deep thought, Gautama felt that he understood the essential truths of life. He then became the Buddha, the awakened one. Gautama spent the rest of his life teaching others his message. After his death, Buddhist ideas spread gradually across Asia. Buddhism has also gained growing acceptance in the Western world. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, from Buddhism by John Snelling. History tells us that Siddhartha Gautama was born the son of a king in northern India about 2,500 years ago. As you can imagine, his early life was one of luxury and privilege. He lived in fantastic palaces, enjoying the best food, clothing, and entertainments. This good life, however, was not enough for Gautama. He wanted to know what the rest of the world was like, so he began to go off in his chariot to visit the village near his palace. He saw poor people, sick people, and even dead bodies being carried off to be cremated. These discoveries so horrified Gautama that he could enjoy palace life no longer. He longed to find out whether there was a way of ending suffering. The quest. Determined to answer this question, he slipped out of his palace one night, leaving his wife and young baby behind, and took the road to the next kingdom. As soon as he had crossed the frontier river, he took off his gorgeous silk robe and put on one of patched and faded orange cloth. He cut off all his fine jet black hair and gave his rings and ornaments to the servant who had come to the frontier with him. Then, carrying nothing but a simple begging bowl into which kind people could, if they wished, put food for him, he said goodbye to his servant and set off in search of an answer to his great question. He was no longer Prince Siddhartha, but just a penniless holy man. In India, there have always been people who have given up everything in order to go off into lonely places in search for truth. Gautama, in his day, sought out the most famous of them and begged them to teach him all that they knew. He studied very hard under them and also performed various exercises, rather like yoga exercises, which were supposed to help him see the truth. It is said that he lived in terrifying forests, burning in the heat of the midday sun and freezing at night, and that he slept on beds of thorns. He also starved himself until his body became so weak and thin that if he touched his stomach, he could feel his backbone poking through from the other side. He did not, however, find an answer to his basic question. Moreover, he realized that if he went on treating his body as he had been, he wouldn't live much longer. He therefore took a little food to give him strength, whereupon the other holy men who had been his friends promptly declared that Gautama has taken to the luxurious life and left him. Enlightenment. Alone and forsaken now, Gautama realized that he had to carry on his quest by himself. He came to a place nowadays called Bodh Gaya, where he found a huge bo tree. Making himself a cushion of grass beneath the tree, he determined to sit there until he found an answer to his question. Now, instead of looking outside himself, Gautama lowered his eyelids, and began to look within. He saw thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, desires, fears, and much else besides. As he watched them, he began to see how these powerful forces working together created the idea of the person Gautama, the person he himself identified as I. When he looked more closely, however, where was this Gautama, the I? He could certainly trace shifting, unstable patterns of feeling and thought, but no fixed and unchanging soul or self. In fact, there was nothing, but not an empty, meaningless nothing. It was indeed a powerful reality, something that was in everything. This reality was not subject to change, nor could it be rocked by the emotions. As it had never been born into the world, it could not die. So Gautama called it the deathless, or nirvana, a relaxed state of being in which there was no grasping after anything. Most of all, it could not be affected by suffering. So it was precisely what Gautama had set out to find. Legend has it that Siddhartha's final understanding or enlightenment came after the night of the full moon of May. As dawn broke, he looked up and saw the morning star rising. At that moment, he saw the truth for himself. He was Gautama no more, but the Buddha, or awakened one, turning the wheel of Dharma. At first, the Buddha was reluctant to tell other people about his great discovery. He thought that they wouldn't want to know. But then he was persuaded that there were some who had just a little dust in their eyes. These people might, with a little assistance, be helped to see the truth. He therefore went to Isipatana, modern Sarnath, near Benares in northern India, where he delivered a sermon to a small crowd in the deer park there. As the Buddha's teaching is called the Dharma and is often symbolized by an 8-spoked wheel, this first sermon is celebrated as the occasion upon which he first turned the wheel of the Dharma. This was the beginning of a great 45-year period during which the Buddha walked the dusty roads of northern India, spreading his message among the people. He taught without caring about which class, race, or sex his listeners belonged to. Some of his followers were householders, people with jobs and homes. Others, however, were prepared to give up everything like that in order to devote themselves entirely to listening to the Buddha's teaching and putting it into practice. These people eventually became known as the Sangha, the community of Buddhist monks and nuns. From the start, they were supported entirely by lay people. They just wandered from place to place, accepting gifts of food and drink from the people. Later, monasteries were built in which they could live together as a community for at least part of the year. Parinirvana. The Buddha was a very remarkable person, but he was not a god or a superhuman of any sort. He was a human being with the same problems and limitations as the rest of us. He therefore had to die at some stage. His death took place in a small town in northern India called Kushinagara, apparently as the result of some kind of food poisoning. His last message to his followers was, "Impermanent are all compounded things. Strive on mindfully." He then passed into what Buddhists called his parinirvana. His first nirvana at Bodh Gaya had been a kind of death to self. His parinirvana then evolved something more, death of the body as well. What actually became of the Buddha after the death of his body is a great mystery. It is something that is beyond the mind of any ordinary man to know and of words to tell. I do want to go back because there are a couple of boxes on the previous pages that we want to look at, because remember, all parts of the page are the text. So this is back a couple pages. It says 142 in the corner there, and I'm going to read the box that says Buddhist art mandalas. Buddhist art mandalas. Ever since the Buddha lived, people have been creating artwork representing him and his teachings. A form of Buddhist art that is especially important in Nepal, Tibet, and Bhutan is the mandala. Mandalas are colorful, geometric designs that represent the ideal world. They are often used for meditation. Before Buddhist monks may construct a mandala, they must be trained in how to draw the figures that make up a mandala and taught what the various figures and colors represent. This training period can take years. Using grains of colored sand, monks often work together, carefully assembling the design. Mandalas are viewed as not only an art form, but also an act of worship, since the mandala represents the enlightened spirit of the Buddha. After painstakingly creating a complex mandala design, Tibetan monks will destroy the mandala to express the temporary nature of all visible forms. And then on the next page, I'm going to read where it says sidelight. A parable is a simple story that illustrates a lesson. Like the founders of other religions and philosophies, the Buddha often used parables to share ideas with others. The moral of the parable is stated at the end. The burning house. Once there was a man who had many children. While he was away one day, his house caught fire with the children still inside. Smoke and flames encircled the house when he returned. "Run out the door," he cried, but the children did not realize that they were in danger and continued to play. Suddenly, the father thought of a way to lure them inside. "I have new toys for you to play with," he shouted. "A deer cart, a goat cart, and an ox cart. Who wants to ride in them first?" A moment later, the children ran safely through the door. The world is like a burning house. People are trapped inside, unaware of the flames of petty, worldly desires that threaten to destroy them. I am like the father who spoke to his children in a way they understood to lead them to safety. And so I speak to you to show you the path to enlightenment. From Buddha by Demi. All right, so your assignment now is going to be to answer some comprehension questions that go with the passage. I do want to make sure that you know the questions that you're answering are not actually just the questions that are here on 144. So if you do those, you're not going to get credit for your assignment. Please make sure you check the portal for the list of questions. And remember, you may have to actually go back and reread some of the text on your own, or the video is here for you to use as you need. You can also email me any questions that you have.